house on Lake Ashbury had always been more than just a house. It was the place where I learned to ride a bike, skinned my knees on the stone walkway, and fell asleep to the hum of crickets outside my window. It was the echo of my mother's laughter in the kitchen, my father's low voice reading blueprints at the dining room table, the creak of the old floorboard right outside the master bedroom that no one ever fixed because it was familiar. To me, it was memory. To my stepmother Louise, it was an asset. She came into our lives when I was 14, 3 years after my mother died of ovarian cancer. I remember thinking how perfect she looked. Tall, elegant, hair always just right. She wore high heels inside the house and called me sweetheart with a tone that never quite felt sweet. My father, Harold, was a brilliant man, architect, quiet, observant, a widower who never quite learned how to iron a shirt or make toast without burning it. When Louise came along, she made things easier, more organized, efficient, and eventually hollow. She changed the drapes, she rearranged the living room, she took down the photo wall my mother built over 10 years, claiming it clashed with the aesthetic. Bit by bit, she repainted the house in her image, and slowly I disappeared from it. When I left for college, I wasn't sad to go. I told myself I'd visit during holidays, but each time I did, it felt less like home and more like a showroom with no soul. My room had been turned into a Pilates space, my books packed into boxes and stored in the attic. The smell of my mom's vanilla and cinnamon candles was gone, replaced by something sharp and floral I could never quite name. I tried to stay connected with my dad. He'd call sometimes, short conversations. He was always tired, always busy. Louise always answered the phone first. "He's resting, dear. He'll call you tomorrow." But tomorrow rarely came. When I was 25, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Late stage. Fast. Devastating. I flew home immediately, but Louise controlled everything. Doctors, visitors, who got to see him and when. I was only allowed to spend an hour each day with him, always under her hovering presence. Still, during one of those visits, while she was distracted on a phone call, my father reached for my hand. His voice was paper-thin. "I know what she's taken from you," he whispered. "But I promise, Gracie, I've left you something. She won't see it coming." I remember staring at him, confused. "Dad, what do you mean?" He didn't answer. He just smiled, a tired, sad kind of smile. That was the last real conversation we had. He died 6 weeks later. Louise held a funeral so lavish it felt obscene. White doves, catered hors d'oeuvres, and an imported marble urn. There was a string quartet and a slideshow that included exactly 2 photos of my mother, and even those were cropped. She wore black Armani and kissed everyone like a grieving socialite. She didn't shed a single tear. The day after the funeral, I arrived at the house to collect some of my father's journals. The locks had been changed. The housekeeper, a woman who had known me since I was in diapers, stood in the doorway and said, without meeting my eyes, "Mrs. Whitmore said no one's allowed in unless she's present." No one. Not even me. I drove away without saying a word. But I knew something Louise didn't. That house? It was never hers. Not in memory. Not in blood. And, as she was about to learn, not even in law. I always thought grief moved slowly, but Louise? She moved like a storm. 3 days after the funeral, she had already scheduled an estate meeting. By the end of the week, she was giving away my father's clothes to charity, his cufflink boxes, his signed architectural sketches, even the slippers he used to wear out on the porch. "He wouldn't want clutter," she said with a smile, sipping wine that had cost more than my rent. "Clean slates help us heal." She never asked me if I wanted anything. Not the desk he built with his own hands. Not the framed blueprints he once said were the soul of the house. Not even the faded Polaroid of me and Dad standing barefoot in the lake, both sunburnt and beaming. She threw them all out. And then came the real blow. She sold his car. She sold his office chair. And then she listed the house. I found out through a friend. She texted me a Zillow screenshot at midnight. "Isn't this your childhood home? It's listed for $1.85 memia." I stared at the screen like it had betrayed me. There it was. High-res photos of the living room now decked in ivory and chrome. My bedroom, now an executive wellness suite. The caption read, "Recently updated luxury lakefront property. A rare piece of Beacon Ridge history. Motivated seller." Motivated, indeed. I barely slept that night. The next morning was the reading of the will. It was held at the firm that had represented my father's business for decades, Harwood and Banks. I remembered visiting that office as a little girl, coloring quietly in the corner while Dad talked zoning laws and city permits. Now I sat at the polished oak table beside Louise, who wore black like she was still mourning, though the sparkle in her earrings suggested otherwise. The lawyer, Mr. Arnold, cleared his throat and began. By the last will and testament of Harold Whitmore. Louise folded her hands. I stared at mine. I hereby leave the sum of $50,000 and select personal effects to my daughter, Grace Evelyn Whitmore. The remainder of my estate, including real property, investments, and liquid assets, shall be transferred in full to my legal spouse, Louise Margaret Whitmore. Louise smiled. It was small, satisfied. The kind of smile you save for boardroom victories and high society gossip. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. $50,000? That was less than what one of the chandeliers in the foyer probably cost. Louise turned to me, her voice syrupy. It's generous, really. He wanted to make sure you had something for your future. My future? She'd erased my past and was now packaging me a consolation prize like I was some inconvenient niece. I nodded, not because I accepted it, but because I couldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. After the meeting, Mr. Arnold asked me to stay behind. Louise left with a flick of her wrist and a remark about spa appointments. The door clicked shut. Arnold waited until the hallway was clear. Then he stood, walked to a locked drawer, and pulled out a slim red envelope. Your father left this, privately, not part of the official will. I stared. Why didn't you mention it earlier? He gave a tired smile. Because he asked me not to. Until everything else played out. He slid the envelope across the table. He said you'd know when to open it. I took it with trembling hands. My name was scrawled across the front in my father's sharp, deliberate handwriting. Just one word. Gracie. I didn't open it until I got home. Not in the car, not in the lobby, not even in the elevator. I waited until I was sitting on the edge of my bed, surrounded by silence, the kind that follows disappointment like a shadow. Inside the envelope were 3 documents: a notarized letter from my father, a certified deed transfer, a trust declaration dated nearly 4 years earlier. I read the letter first. Gracie. If you're reading this, it means the surface story is over, and it's time for the real one. I knew Louise would come for the house. That was always her endgame, but the house was never meant for her. It's ours, your mother's, mine, and now, yours. 2 years before my diagnosis, I moved the house into an irrevocable land trust. You are the sole beneficiary. It cannot be revoked. Let her play her hand, then show her who truly owns the table. My hands were shaking, and for the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, but because my father had seen me, had protected me, had believed I'd find my way back. Even when everyone else had erased me from the will, he'd written me back into the future. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not the firm that handled my father's estate. They were too close to Louise, too publicly tied to the will. I needed someone who had no ties, no interest in family loyalties. I needed someone who believed in clean law and dirty war. His name was Jonathan Mays, a probate litigator with a reputation for being surgical and cold. Perfect. We met at a downtown cafe, the kind with tile floors and bitter espresso, where lawyers conducted their most confidential affairs behind small cappuccinos. I handed him the envelope. He read in silence, face unreadable. When he was done, he looked up. You're telling me she's already signed a sale agreement? Yes, I said. The listing went live last week. I have the screenshots. I even posed as a buyer and requested the seller's disclosure packet. He leaned back, arms folded. She's trying to sell a property she doesn't legally own. Exactly. Then this will be fun. Over the next 3 days, Jonathan verified everything. He pulled property records, confirmed that the land trust was filed with the county nearly 4 years prior and had never been amended. The trustee was my father. The sole beneficiary was me. He checked for loopholes. There were none. Because my father? He was meticulous. He'd done this before Louise ever set foot in that house. He had moved the deed into the trust quietly, legally, and irrevocably. On paper, he never owned the house at the time of his death, which meant it wasn't his to give away, which meant Louise had inherited nothing. Jonathan looked impressed. Your dad played the long game. He always did, I said quietly. He just never told me I was holding the winning piece. Meanwhile, Louise had gone full steam ahead. I kept tabs through the real estate website. The listing was active, labeled pending offer. The open house photos were everywhere. She even did an interview with a local magazine about moving on from grief and letting go of the past. She had no idea she was standing in a house she didn't own. The buyer, according to public records, was a small real estate firm specializing in luxury renovations. The deal was expected to close in less than 2 weeks. We didn't have much time. Jonathan sent a formal cease and desist letter to Louise's real estate agent, then issued an ownership dispute notice to the buyer's attorney. It was all done swiftly, cleanly, no shouting, no confrontation, just paperwork and power. 3 days later, Louise called me. I hadn't heard her voice since the will reading. "Grace," she said, "what the hell is going on?" "I'm not sure what you mean. My sale is frozen. Frozen. Some lawyer just sent a claim saying I don't own the house." "What the hell are you doing?" I smiled. I let silence stretch between us like silk pulled taut. "I'm just protecting what belongs to me." "Your father left me that house." "No," I said. "He didn't. I was his wife, and I was his daughter, the one he didn't forget." She was quiet, then rage. "You ungrateful little brat, you waited like a snake, didn't you? You—" "No, Louise, I didn't wait. I was patient. That's different." Click. She hung up. The buyer pulled out 2 days later. The public statement was simple. "Due to a title ownership dispute, we are terminating this agreement." But privately, Jonathan told me they were furious. They'd invested time, energy, and early-stage development planning, only to find out the seller had no clear title. Louise's reputation took a hit. Word got around. Real estate circles talk, especially when there's scandal. Especially when it's on a $2 million deal. I drove to the house a week later. No one stopped me. The locks hadn't changed because they couldn't. She wasn't legally authorized to alter the property. The trust was now publicly documented. I held the papers in my hand. When I stepped inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind that echoes. But this time, it didn't feel like I was trespassing. It felt like I'd come home. I wandered through the rooms she had redecorated, her taste layered over the bones of my childhood. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. It just didn't matter. Because no matter what she had painted, changed, or bought, the deed had my name on it now. Not hers. Never hers. By the time the sale fell through, Louise was in full damage control mode. She tried to blame the real estate agent, then the buyer, then the confusing legal paperwork she supposedly hadn't seen. But the truth had already sunk in. She had tried to sell a house she didn't own. And in the world of high-end real estate, that's more than just embarrassing. It's a red flag. No developer, investor, or broker would touch her listings after that. The whispers started, about her shady ethics, about how she didn't even know her own husband's assets. One article even framed it as a cautionary tale. When $1 million mansion isn't really yours, what buyers should know about irrevocable trusts. That one made me laugh. I saved a PDF copy. Legally, she couldn't be prosecuted for fraud. She hadn't signed under false identity or forged documents. She had simply acted under wrong assumptions, and the law doesn't care about your assumptions. But the buyer had grounds for a civil claim, for breach of contract, misrepresentation, and wasted costs. And oh, did they file. A 6-figure lawsuit hit her desk 2 weeks later. According to my lawyer, she tried to offer a private settlement, but they declined. They wanted it public. They wanted to make an example of her. Sometimes, Jonathan said, it's not about money, it's about reputation. And Louise, she built her life around reputation. Charity boards, country clubs, art fundraisers, those doors started to close. Quietly at first, then with certainty. She was no longer invited, no longer asked to speak. Her name disappeared from committee lists. Event chairs stopped responding to her emails. She wasn't ruined, but she was fading. And for someone like Louise, that was worse. She tried one last time to get to me. Showed up outside the gates of the house one morning, dressed impeccably as always, oversized sunglasses, tailored coat, manicured hands holding a paper coffee cup like it was a prop in a movie she was still starring in. I opened the door. We stared at each other for a long time. "I just want to talk," she said. I didn't invite her in. We stood on the porch. "You could have said something sooner," she murmured, a note of practiced sadness in her voice. "You didn't have to ambush me." I didn't ambush you, I said evenly. You walked into a room you assumed was yours? I just turned the lights on. She winced, barely. Do you really need the house, Grace? Is this about bricks and windows? Or is it about revenge? That word, as if it were dirty, as if it didn't belong in her mouth. It's about legacy, I said. It's about what was stolen from me in pieces, photograph by photograph, memory by memory, while I was told to smile and be quiet. I gave your father 6 years. You took 6 years, and tried to erase everything he built before you ever showed up. She looked away, lips trembling. I loved that house. No, I said, voice low. You loved what the house said about you. Silence. Then she said something I'll never forget. You really are your father's daughter. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Yes, I said. I am. She walked away after that. No tears, no apology, just quiet resignation. She never came back. I didn't renovate the house, not much anyway. I didn't rip out her marble countertops or repaint the walls just to prove a point. That's not what power looks like. Power is walking through the front door and knowing you belong. It's lighting a fire in the hearth and not asking permission. It's hanging your mother's picture back in the hallway and not needing anyone's approval to do it. Power is silence, when you no longer owe anyone an explanation. Some nights, I sit on the old swing in the back garden, the one she almost tore down, and sip tea while the moonlight spills over the lake. I remember every version of myself that ever lived in this house. The little girl who built fairy houses under the oak tree. The teenager who cried into her pillow when she felt replaced. The young woman who stood at the gates, locked out. Now, I'm all of them. And none of them. I'm just Grace. Home. I used to think healing would feel like victory. Like standing on a mountaintop with a flag in your hand, hair whipping in the wind as your enemies crumble below. But the truth is quieter. It's walking barefoot across the wooden floors of your childhood home and realizing your heart doesn't clench anymore. It's pouring coffee in the kitchen, where you once whispered your grief, and not hearing ghosts. It's remembering, and not breaking. After Louise left, I didn't celebrate. I cleaned. Not in anger, but in reverence. I opened the old trunks in the attic, pulled out photo albums she'd tried to hide, ran my fingers over faded snapshots of summers and snowstorms and birthday cakes with terrible frosting. I restored the mosaic lamp my mother made by hand. I rehung the wooden plaque in the hallway, carved with our family motto, strong roots, deep truth. It had been taken down, shoved in the basement behind unused furniture. Now it hangs where everyone can see it. Where I can see it. Every day. People started reaching out once word spread. Distant cousins. My father's old colleagues. Even the mailman who remembered me as the quiet girl who always read on the porch. They sent me letters, photos, old stories, pieces of my family that had scattered during the Louise years. I collected them all. Then I did something bold. I started writing. I called the project The House That Didn't Forget Me. It began as a personal essay. Then a blog. Then a full manuscript. I didn't write it to shame Louise or glorify myself. I wrote it to preserve the truth, to document what happens when power meets patience, when a daughter is dismissed and decides not to disappear. I wrote for every child who's ever been pushed out of their own history, for every woman told to let it go when she was robbed of something sacred. And people read it. A small publisher picked it up. It's not a bestseller, but it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be true. One afternoon, I stood in the garden, next to the lilac bush my mother planted the year I was born. I was holding a letter from my father. Not the legal one. A different one, hidden inside the binding of his architecture notebook. I'd only just found it. It read, Gracie, I know I made mistakes. I know I let silence grow where words should have lived. But not a day passed where I didn't think of you. Of your laugh, your stubbornness, your brilliant heart. This house is more than lumber and stone. It's the map of our memories. I built it for your mother. I leave it to you. Don't just live in it. Own it, with your name, your fire, your future. Love always, Dad, I cried, standing in that garden. But it wasn't grief anymore. It was gratitude. Louise sold everything she could. She downsized, moved to a condo 3 cities away. Last I heard, she was hosting wine tastings for people who didn't know who she used to be. We haven't spoken since. I don't hate her, but I will never forget what she tried to erase, and I will never give her the satisfaction of thinking she succeeded. Because here I am, in the house she once claimed, tending the garden she once let rot, framing the blueprints she threw in boxes, and breathing. Fully. Freely. There are no parades for quiet victories, but sometimes the greatest revenge is not vengeance, it's continuation. It's turning on the porch light each night and knowing, I was never the guest, I was always the heir. She just didn't read the fine print. This house did not forget me, and I will never forget who I am. Not ever again. There's a room on the second floor of the house that no one ever touched. It used to be a guest room. Then it became a storage space. Louise tried to convert it into a meditation nook once, but gave up halfway when she couldn't decide on wallpaper. I cleared it out after everything ended. Swept the floors, washed the windows, let light pour in through the sheer curtains my mother had sewn before I was born. Now it's a studio, one long desk against the wall, an easel, a bookshelf stacked with my father's design journals, and my own scribbled notebooks. There's a worn leather chair in the corner where I read with my legs curled up like I used to when I was a kid. It's mine. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I claimed it. I've started drawing again. Not buildings, at least not yet, but ideas. Emotions. Memory maps. Little blueprints of who I used to be and who I'm still becoming. And maybe someday I'll design a house of my own. But this one, this house, it will always be sacred. Because this is the place I came back to myself. Sometimes, I still walk the halls at night, barefoot, letting the creaks and groans of the floorboards greet me like old friends. I run my hand along the banister that my father sanded by hand, touch the brass knobs on the doors my mother polished each spring. Open the windows just enough to hear the lake lapping quietly in the distance. This isn't just real estate. It's inheritance in its truest form, not money, not marble, but memory that fought its way home. I'm no longer the girl who asked permission to belong. I'm the woman who built her seat at the table and reclaimed the deed to her name. This story could have ended with courtrooms and bitterness, but it didn't. It ended in stillness, in peace, in presence, and in the quiet hum of a truth restored. What's yours will find its way back. But only if you're brave enough to wait, and fierce enough to claim it when it does. And this time, I did.